So, it's so good to be here. Some of you already know this. Egypt is where I had my first intercultural experience, Isaac experience. It was my first conference outside of Canada. It was here in Egypt, in Cairo, in 2001, for Afro Expo. And that event really changed the way I looked at life, looked at possibilities, and the things I could do to impact it positively. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you how that you can improve world peace and how you can, in your way, contribute to the vision that Isaac has set 70 years ago. And to do this, I'm going to talk about cultural intelligence. I'm going to explain what it is and also why it is important. But before that, let me tell you a little bit about myself and why this topic is so close to my heart. So when I first left my home country, I was 4 years old. We moved to Algeria with my parents, and over there, I saw people that looked different and also acted different. It got me curious to know why they do the things they do and how they see the world. This curiosity got me not only to travel, but also seek out local contacts where I would go travel to see how they see the world and what's their real day-to-day life. Also, when I plan my trips now, I always make sure in my network find some local contacts that I can hang out with and do what they usually do. Going to the museum is nice, but it's kind of limited, I find. I prefer to just hang out with these people and learn through them, do their usual things, and get that experience with me. When the first time cultural challenges became an issue was at work. With my different startups, we always had multicultural teams, remote teams, and everything in between. And sometimes the different ways of looking at the world, of communicating, and of collaborating became issues. But it's thanks to cultural intelligence, or CQ, that I was able to, with my team, work together, relate to each other, and find the ways that we could work together to achieve our common goals. Now, what is cultural intelligence? It is just like emotional intelligence, which is EQ. Here you have CQ. It's a form of intelligence. It helps you to relate to others and to work together effectively. It is not something that comes automatically. It doesn't depend on where you lived, where you worked, even if you're an Isaacer. Although, as an Isaacer, chances are you have a higher level of CQ. But it's always good to keep an open mind and work on this to keep improving it. The good news is that anybody can become culturally intelligent or more culturally intelligent. And actually the reason why I decided to work in this field is that building my 4 startups over 14 years, I saw that there was an increase in diversity both in the workplace and the marketplace. And for some people, this was challenging. So I decided to take my passion for cultures and travel, as well as my experience building companies and entrepreneurship, and combine this to help others better relate to others, and so that they can be successful as well. Why is CQ relevant? As I said, the world is changing, and this diversity comes up with new issues. People living and working in countries they're not originally from can impact their professional and their personal life. David Livermore, who's an academic who did a lot of research in this field, interviewed many executives in 68 countries. 90% of them stated that cross-cultural leadership is their main issue. So CQ is the one tool that can really help with this. When you don't have CQ or you have low CQ situations, it takes longer to get things done. There's more cost, more confusion, more frustration. And if you might remember in the business news, a few examples of failure, and out of the 70% of cross-cultural ventures that failed, you had when Mercedes and Daimler and Chrysler tried to merge. Also when Walmart went to Germany. That little adventure ended up being a $1 billion write-off. I'd like you to think a little bit about your own challenges, either work professionally or just with a neighbor. Things that there's some kind of friction and it's because you're from a different culture, you are thinking differently. Keep this in mind as I go through the presentation, and you might find ways that what I say here can help you in this situation get things better. I'm going to share a little bit about what I've learned and what I'm using, and hopefully you find it useful. The CQ framework that David Livermore, the guy I mentioned earlier, has developed has 4 areas. You have the CQ drive, which is your motivation and confidence. You have the CQ knowledge. This is about having the information that you need for your specific cross-cultural challenge. You have CQ strategy, which is about making plans, executing, and then reflecting on it, and making adjustments if needed. And you have CQ action, which is behavior, adapting or not adapting. Now let's start with CQ drive. The key question here is, what is your motivation and your confidence as well as your resilience when it comes to cross-cultural interactions? And I say resilience because sometimes it's not easy, you have frustration, and if you have the motivation, you can keep going until you succeed. I'll give you 3 tips for each of these 4 areas that you can use today to make things better. The first one is to be honest with yourself. We each have some cultures that we have more difficulty with. Sometimes we had maybe a bad experience with somebody from that country or culture many years ago, and it still clouds, it gives us challenges to be open to these people. Being honest with ourselves helps us get beyond that. We also have all our biases, unconscious biases that we all have, and there are some tests that can help you identify these. Now, we all have these automatic impulses, but knowing about them is what can help you control them. The second part, my favorite, is to eat and socialize. In many cultures, food is a central place. Food is what brings people together. People eat, enjoy each other's company, and this is also where trust is built. In many cultures, the real transactions happen over the meal once you have spent some quality time together. So you should try everything, especially in some cultures where when a special guest comes, or a guest is always special, they spend days preparing something special. Something that is in the culture very important and has a significance. So make sure you try everything. Now, if what you see is not appealing, try it anyway. Cut it in a small piece, add rice, or a lot of rice, and try it, and don't make a face, because they'll be watching. The last part, what I think Isaacers we can really relate to, is to work for something bigger. Developing your cultural intelligence already has a lot of advantages, like a global network, better pay, better job opportunities, but these remain external motivators. If you work for something bigger, like changing the world, helping your community, all these things, this will help you through the difficult moments. Now let's move on to the knowledge part. Here the key question is, do you have the information that you need for your particular challenge or situation? The first part is understanding the role of culture in your behavior and that of others. Culture is what dictates how you're going to think, you're going to act. It's not about being like these other people. It's about understanding the forces that drive their society and their lives, so you can better lead them. And when it comes to culture, we are all in several circles of culture. We are all Isaacers, but we're also Hungarian, Canadian, Indian, many cultures, also many generations. Each has its own culture. Some are engineers, some are accountants. So these are each overlapping cultures, and make that each individual is a very unique individual. Helping to understanding this helps to relate to that particular person. Also, understanding different languages is very useful because each language has a different way of thinking. So if you can use that language with whoever you're interacting, great. But even if not, just having this other language gives you the mental flexibility that when there's an issue, you can see more than one point of view and you can find a better solution. The cultural systems, cultural values, these are spectrums that each culture is positioned at different places. You have things like legal system, economic system. You also have things like, is it an individualistic society or it's more community-based. Often we talk about entrepreneurship. You have some societies that have a higher comfort with uncertainty. This means that, in principle, people from this culture should be more adept at being entrepreneurs. But what happens is that these sophisticated stereotypes are only best used as a first guess before you actually meet the people you're going to be working with. Now let's look at the strategy part. Here the key question is, what plan you have to make, how you can execute, and you can make sure that things went the way they went, you wanted them to go, and if not, make the right adjustments. The first thing you should do is always plan cross-cultural interactions. The best way to fail is to lead from the gut. Many leaders, some I work with who have been to many countries, and they think, oh, I'm an executive in my country. Of course I must know everything really well. But that's not the case. As soon as the cultural context changes, you have to start from scratch. That's like going to a new place. When you go to home, you don't even look at GPS, it's automatic, but when you drive to a new location, you go slower. You might look at the map, you might put on the GPS. This is the same thing. You also have to become more aware. Be aware of differences of when there's some behaviors that you see that are unexpected. Don't assume. Ask questions. Ask people. You can have maybe a cultural guide that can have the perspective needed, who knows the culture but also knows other cultures. And the last one is checking your assumptions. This is something that is very useful in everyday life, but especially here. Now let's look at the action part. With action, the CQ action area, it's about knowing when to adapt and when not to adapt. The first thing you should do is adapt your communication. This is about the choice of words. In some cultures, you have the way you ask questions, the way you do apologies or requests. You have to adjust what words you use. You also have the delivery. Obviously talk slow. Simple sentences. You can have to reword in different ways to make sure it's understood. And also the body language, the non-verbal communication. In some cultures, eye contact is necessary to establish trust. In other cultures, it's a lack of respect. So you have to know in which way, how to behave. You also have touching, the distance, depending on the genders. And just the way you hold yourself. You also have to adapt the way you lead. So depending on the goals, on the culture, on how you are perceived as well, you have to adapt how you approach the situation. And also, basically, when to adapt and when not to adapt is a key question. In some cultures, which are called tight cultures, you have precise expectations on how to behave. Here, you should spend the time to know how to behave and hold yourself. Loose cultures are those that over the centuries had more diversity. Maybe this was a trader civilization that had made contact with other cultures. In this case, you don't have to worry about it so much. So let's review the 4 areas. You have the drive, the motivation. Second, the knowledge, if you know the information that you need. Then you have the strategy, making the plan, executing, and making sure things went the way you expected them. Often they don't. And in those cases, you have to be able to go back, ask the right question with the right level of sensitivity so that you find and adjust course until you succeed. And of course, the action is about your behavior, adapting, how to adapt, and when not to adapt. Now this is really nice, but what are the benefits? Why you should learn CQ? Let's talk first about for leaders, culturally intelligent leaders. The first advantage is intercultural adjustment. This could be for going on a mission, maybe 2 weeks to do business in another country. It could also be when you move to a new place. Or simply domestically in your own country, you move to a new team perhaps, or a new company which has its culture, and you need to adapt, you need to relate to them. The second part is about judgment and decision making. Having high CQ, you can relate to the different people in your team so that you can see the different points of view and bring them together so that you make also the best decision possible. And leadership performance, there's so many areas. Here, you're better at building trust, about sales. And let's just talk about sales for a moment. When you try to find what is appealing for somebody or a group of people that is culturally bound. So it depends who you're talking to, what culture they are from. When it comes to service, let's say for doctors, given that we talked about health, here you need to relate to the patient so that you know how to communicate what you need to communicate so that they really understand it and they change their behavior so that their health gets better. For organizations, you can expand into new diverse markets, either internationally or domestically. When the crisis hit in 2008, most of these companies were looking for new markets to survive. CQ here can help to be successful in these new markets. Of course, there is speed and efficiency, which we all want. Being able to collaborate better helps a lot to be faster, to be better, and in the end of the day, more profit and cost saving. And of course, for Isaac, why we're here, it's better collaboration between our members. As I said earlier, we're all Isaacers, but we all know that sometimes there's some friction because we come from different cultures, different generations. And with CQ, we can work better together to be more successful. We also talked about the youth we want to impact. We only impact 100,000 so far. What about the rest? We need to relate to them to be able to impact them. Somebody who has never had in their circle of friends a university student, they come from a different worldview than young university students. So how can you tell them what to do to help them? You need to relate to them to really understand them deeply. Can you be a global leader? I think many of us are to a certain level, and we can always be better if you want to. The first thing to do is get rid of these general one-size-fits-all leadership mantras. They look good on your Facebook post or LinkedIn, but they don't work so well globally. You should also consciously adapt your leadership, always. And it doesn't mean that you should always mimic or adapt to every single culture. You just have to know when and how. What I've done is I've put together a little document with some tips that you can use to help yourself develop your CQ and impact your own life positively. You can get it on this link. And I would also love to hear about the challenges you thought about earlier when I asked that question. So now only one question remains. What will you do to improve your CQ? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. It was very, very clear, interesting framework.